Welcome to another episode of Author Chat. I'm your host, Caitlyn Devereaux. Joining me today is award-winning author and artist Sarah Causey. She is a biographer of UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, as well as a painter and illustrator. We'll be talking today about her newest release, Vesper. Before we dive in, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
I recently read this book, Vesper, and I really enjoyed it. Tell me, what inspired you to write it? Give us the backstory.
I think there's truth to the idea that everything we write has some degree of autobiography. Now, sometimes that's subtle and minute, sometimes it's not, but I think that even so, our work at least carries some fingerprint. Even if it's only a smudge, it carries something autobiographical about ourselves. And that's certainly the case with Vesper. When I was putting ideas together for it, I was writing it at a time when I was trying to come to terms with my own life as a full-time creative and coming out, so to speak, as an artist. There's not really a rule book for that. There's no firm play-by-play guidebook of how it's done. And I was trying to work out my own salvation and how does this happen? How do I navigate this and maneuver all of these crazy things that come up, because it's such a different way of living from getting up Monday through Friday, working 8 to 5, having a guaranteed paycheck, or what you think is a guaranteed paycheck every other Friday, and then having a boss who comes and tells you what to do. This is just a completely different way of living. And I wrote Vesper as a sort of metaphor for my own journey as an artist. I relate to Vesper as a protagonist because she's an introvert and she loves to read. She sort of escapes vicariously through her books, but then through a series of events, which I won't spoil. But it's like we say in the business, the inciting incident. Through an inciting incident, she gets forced into this situation that she never would have imagined. And she has to live on her wits. Even when she thinks that she's alone and help is not immediately visible on the horizon, she learns that actually she's not completely alone. And even when she needs to solve a problem on her own, she can. She doesn't have to resort to brutality, brute force, shoving the square peg into the round hole. And I think sometimes in fantasy, even young adult fantasy, we can find this brutality and extreme violence. And that was not the direction that I wanted to go in, because so much of life is not about shoving the square peg into the round hole. It's about learning to live on your wits, being able to solve problems. And sometimes the problem is not so much outright solved as it is simply moved around or moved past. Perhaps I can't untie this knot, but maybe I can just cut this part of the string off and go on. And that's a big part for me of what inspired Vesper.
Yeah, I love how you lean into this idea of quiet bravery. This is not Game of Thrones. It's not about sex and violence or blood and gore.
Yeah, I wanted to lean much more into fable and allegory as opposed to brute violence and erotica. It boggles my mind sometimes, the books that are marketed to young adults and even children, the things that have become permissible in that genre. I'm a bit like, whoa. But my style is more cozy, it's more intimate than that. It's not about, and on page 2, there's a bloodbath. Again, no shade. There's room for those types of things. And I've read plenty of dystopian sci-fi. In fact, one of my favorite genres of sci-fi is dystopian visions of the future. But it's not necessarily what I myself want to write about. And it definitely wasn't the right direction for this story. I didn't want Vesper to go from being this introvert that loves to read and look at the stars to suddenly turning into a murder bunny. And that just really felt inauthentic to me for the character.
What do you think the challenges are for authors who want something that might be deemed old-fashioned?
God, that's a great question. And I'm not sure that I have a great answer for it, really, because for me, I just go with it. I just lean into it. I try at least to let the storyline and the characters breathe enough that They tell me what to do. They choreograph the moves for me so that it's not me trying to force anything to happen. And I always want at the end when I'm going through for a final read, it needs to feel authentic. It needs to feel like I've done right by the characters involved. Even if we're talking about fictional characters, you want to feel like you've done the right thing. And I knew for this book in particular, gratuitous sex and violence was not the way to go. I didn't want it to be a snooze fest that would put anybody to sleep. And I think maybe that's my answer to your question, is that it can be challenging, but at the same time, you can have a G or PG rated book or movie that tells a darn good story. It's not about getting into the gutter, it's not about blood and guts. It's about just tell me an interesting, compelling story.
I also like that you leaned into the idea of the traditional fable. Those types of stories usually carry timeless wisdom and advice. What do you think you were getting at with Vesper? What do you hope a reader, young or old, would take from it?
I wanted to play around with fable and allegory without getting preachy or moralizing. For me, it is a story of hope. As I mentioned, Vesper has to live on her wits. She gets put into situations that she never would have imagined and has to figure out how to solve the problems, how to move past whatever the current trial or tribulation may be. And we're all going to have those things that we face in life. And I think that's really what I want the reader to take away. It's not that we're trying to live some magical life where we never have a problem, we never have a challenge. I'm not even sure how that would be possible. You would have to live the most bland and vanilla life on the planet to never have a problem to solve or a challenge to rise to. So it's not about trying to eliminate difficulties, it's really about challenging yourself, being able to rise to the occasion and to know that you have that within you. You can embrace change. You can move into a different phase of life and not only do it like gritting your teeth or keeping a white knuckle grip on the steering wheel, but really being able to embrace it, not just to live or to survive, but to go into it thriving. That I think is what I want people to take away, is that ultimately it has a message of hope.
I do have to ask about the villain, Malbrute. We don't want to get into spoilers, of course, but I think the best novels have both a great protagonist and an interesting villain. So, spill some tea with us about Malbrute. Is he based on anyone or anything in particular?
Oh, yes, that's always the juicy part. I remember whenever I was in graduate school, and you have to start early thinking about what you're going to do for your master's thesis because you want to have a lot of time to work on it. It's definitely not something to try and cram out in the last few months. I guess some people do, but that's not the way that I was taught to do it. And I'll never forget, I had this meeting with my thesis advisor, and I knew that I wanted to do something with Goethe's Faust, but I just wasn't sure what it was. And as we were spitballing ideas back and forth, he's like, your best ideas really come when you're talking about Mephistopheles. It's like your eyes light up and you seem to have the most joy talking about him. And I laughed and I was like, well, because he's a bon vivant. He's the most interesting character and he has the most interesting lines. That's where there's some real meat on the bone, I think. And so, yeah, a great villain definitely is important for any story. I also think about the Marvel movies with Loki. When you watch that first Thor movie, it's like, yeah, okay, yay, Thor, Loki. That's where you can really sink your teeth in. For me, Malbrute represents a system and an archetype. It's not about any one particular person or character, it's about a system. I don't want to get too heavy handed here, but it just reminds me of like the author Peter Dale Scott. He wrote a book about the murder of JFK, and he talks about this system that he labels deep politics, the type of system where political murders and coups d'etats happen and they generally go unpunished. It's like it's just allowed to happen and it's part of the system. So for me, Malbrute represents tyranny, authoritarianism, leadership by bombastic ego, the type of dictator and tyrant who doesn't care about the people at all. Someone who is definitely out for their own political gain, their own financial gain, and stroking their own ego, so that it's never really about trying to be a good leader. It's never about trying to have any kind of compassion and figure out what's best for everybody involved. It's always about self aggrandizement and ego adulation.
So, what's next on the horizon? What should readers watch for in the coming months?
I would say I'm a biased source on this one, but I feel like I have some interesting things in the hopper for sure. I'm working on a screenplay. I thought at first that it was going to be a comedy movie, but after letting the characters and the plot breathe, it really started to tell me, the project told me that it needs to be a horror movie. I've written some short stories. I'm working on illustrating a book called How to Host a Unicorn. My goal, knock on some wood, is that that will be out in time for the holiday season. I'm really hoping to release it by mid-November at the latest. My next nonfiction project about Dag Hammarskjöld, about whom I'm crazy. I just adore Dag. I think probably everybody within a 5 mile radius of me knows that. My next nonfiction project about Dag, which I've titled simply Dag, I intend to release on July 29th of next year, which would be Dag's birthday. So a lot has to happen behind the scenes between now and then. I'm hoping that I've paced myself well enough, but time will always tell.
Thanks for joining me today. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in.